Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this, the fourth in a series of 5 webinars being run in conjunction with AgriSearch, AFBI, and UFU. I am John McLenaghan, Deputy President of Ulster Farmers Union, and tonight's webinar is entitled Nutrient Management in Grassland. A little bit of housekeeping rules, just so we're all aware of them before we get going. So to let you know that this evening's event is being recorded and will be available for rewatching or for at some other time. Any questions you have can be put through the Q&A button, which you'll find on the screen. It'll either be, depending on just which device you're on, either the top of the screen or in the bottom of the screen. You should see a Q&A button. So if you have questions, you can put those questions through from the start of the proceedings. As soon as we get started, don't wait till the end. As soon as you have a question, just put it through on that, and then we'll come to those questions at the end of the presentations. There will be a survey at the end, and I invite you all to fill that in. The more feedback we get about these events, the better we can run them going forward in the future. And our expectation is this evening that we should be finished around 9 o'clock. And the only final thing I have to say is to make you all aware that the final in this series of webinars will be next Tuesday evening, which will be farm case studies of carbon benchmarking, and that very much covers and sort of summarizes the 4 previous webinars that a number of you may well have been participating in all 4 of them so far. So that's all I have to say for now. I look forward to coming back to do the Q&A later on in the evening, and I will now introduce Professor Elizabeth Magowan, who's going to take us through a little bit more of what's going to happen this evening. So over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, John. And if you could just confirm for me if you can see a screen there, full screen, that'd be useful.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you very much, Jason. So good evening, folks, and thank you again for letting us into your living rooms or kitchens or even dairy parlours or wherever you may be this evening. I'm just going to try and set the scene for you, and I do apologise to anybody who's been on the past 3. I am like a broken record on this setting the scene agenda, but for any of you who haven't been on since, I'm just hoping that first slide maybe has come up okay for you, but basically back in the day, 50, 60, 70 years ago, we had our grandfathers of the day, their main goal was to produce food, and indeed they've done that very well. And that was largely probably in a fairly extensive system where there was probably more biodiversity than there is today, and indeed soil health was probably better. But with the passage of time and the pressure to produce more food, and that was very much the heavy policy environment, that food production intensified for the likes of Joe Senior here in the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. And indeed, in that late 80s into the 90s, nitrates and phosphates regulation started to come in, and that was something that farmers had to start managing the nitrates and phosphates from their land flowing into the waterways. Now, going forward, it's going to be a further evolution of what farming needs to do for both food production and the environment. So here's young Josie, and she'll be taking over the farm at some stage. And just like Ian's young folk there that we'll maybe meet later on, going forward, farming is going to have to continue to produce healthy, safe food for our population. But in doing so, we will have to restore a lot of that biodiversity, restore our soil health, minimise the nitrates and phosphates that could potentially end up in waterways, and the gaseous emissions now very much so ammonia emissions, as well as those greenhouse gases of methane and nitrous oxide. So this series of webinars is very much here to help the farming industry in Northern Ireland take action now to both maximise food production, but doing it in such a way that we're minimising the environmental impact of our practices. So there's lots of scientists working away very hard in labs and field studies to come up with new innovations. But there are lots of things that farmers can do right now. And I had the pleasure of working with colleagues from across the UK in the past year or so to produce a booklet funded by CL on various interventions on how farmers can reduce emissions. So if you're interested in that, the booklet's available through the CL website. But over this series of 5 webinars, what we've tried to hone in on is as many tools in the toolbox as we can give to you to reduce nitrogen, phosphorus, greenhouse gases, restore biodiversity, as well as soil health. So In the first webinar, we were looking at increasing production efficiency and especially focusing in on 24-month calving and 24-month slaughtering of animals. Then David Patterson took us through resilient grassland management. We had a talk from Anna and Amy and Omar looking at some dairy nutrition interventions. Tonight, Suzanne Higgins is going to be talking to us about nutrient management in grassland to, as I say, protect the environment. And then next week, as John was saying, at the wrap-up session on carbon benchmarking. So I'm going to hand over to Suzanne now to take us through this, the fourth webinar on nutrient management. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm Suzanne Higgins. I'm a soil scientist at AFBI, and tonight I'm going to talk about nutrient management on your farm. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about nutrient management at farm and field scale. So some of the things I'm going to cover this evening are the importance of testing your soil. So we need to test our soil for the main plant nutrients, which are nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur. We also need to know the pH of our soil. We need to know the crop requirements, and we need to know how to minimize losses. So the nutrients we apply, it's really important that these are used for plant growth and we minimize any losses to the environment. I'm going to be talking about some different methods of application and the importance of the timing of application of nutrients. So correct nutrient management is really important because it can improve your overall soil health. Okay, so the first thing is to sample your soil. Say if we don't sample our soil and we don't know the nutrients, then it's very hard to manage the nutrients in our soil. Okay, so I'm hoping that a lot of you here will benefit from the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme. You may be in Zone 1 and have already had your soils tested, or you may be in Zone 2, 3, and 4 and be getting your soils tested over the next 3 years. So within the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, every field on your farm will be soil tested, and you'll get a map such as this showing the results of your soil analysis. So you will get a map of your soil pH of every field on your farm and lime recommendations. You'll get a map of phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and sulfur. And this will tell you the nutrient status of each of your fields. So on your maps, you'll see a zigzag shape across each field, and this is the track that the samplers took to sample your field. Then each field will be color coded. So if a field is color coded red, it means it's above optimum in that nutrient, and we would be recommending you don't apply any more nutrient, for example, phosphorus or potash to that field. If it's green, it's optimum. And if it's an orange color, that means it's below optimum. So there may be some fields on your farm which are deficient in nutrient or low in nutrient, and we'd recommend that you need to build up the nutrient in the soil in that field. Okay, so it's also important to know your crop requirements. So it's possible in Northern Ireland to achieve a yield of 16 tonne of dry matter per hectare per year with the correct nutrient management. So this would be the more intensive farmers who maybe have a 3 to 5 cut silage system. And these farmers would be targeting that higher yield, so they would be applying more nitrogen and then more nutrient overall, so more P and K overall. So the more grass you grow, the more nutrient you can apply. So the target index for your soils would be an index 2 for all of your nutrients. But across Northern Ireland, there's many farmers operating a much lower intensity. So not every farmer is an intensive farmer. Across Northern Ireland, there's a lot of more extensive farmers, and they would only be maybe cutting once or twice a year, and their target yield would be around about 7 tonne of dry matter per hectare per year. So not every farmer needs to aim for those high yields. So it depends what type of farm you're operating, how much grass you need. And so the more extensive farmers can actually get all the nutrients they require very often from slurry alone. So a lot of those more extensive farmers don't need to be putting on a lot of additional bought in fertilizers. So it's really important to know the system you're operating, your target yields, and the amount of nutrients you need to apply. So I'm just going to focus on soil pH for a second. So soil pH is really, really important for the health of your soil. So soil is a living ecosystem. So 1 teaspoon of soil, there are actually more organisms than there are people on Earth. So this is a staggering fact. Soil is teeming with life, and we need to look after that, the soil, the health of the soil, and all the organisms in it. And one of the ways we can do this is get the pH of our soil right. So a lot of the processes in soil operate at a certain soil pH. And for grassland soils, we are aiming for a pH of 6 to 6.5. So if you have your pH right, this is when your nutrient utilization is optimum. So the nitrogen you apply is more likely to be used and taken up by the grass if your pH is correct, around 6 to 6.5. If your pH drops under pH 6, so between 5.5 and 6, your nutrient utilization, particularly your nitrogen utilization, can drop to 85%, and you could be wasting around 20% of that nitrogen you apply because it's not used effectively within the soil and be taken up by the grass. So it's really important. One of the easiest, simplest things you can do is manage your soil pH. And we would recommend that you apply lime little and often rather than leaving, for example, 10 years between applications. It's better to maybe apply lime every 5 years and just top it up rather than leaving it a very long time between applications. So I'm now going to focus on nitrogen. So nitrogen is your main plant nutrient. So you really need the nitrogen to grow your grass. But the problem with nitrogen is really easily lost from the soil. Okay, so you can potentially lose 30 to 50% of the nitrogen you apply. It's really soluble in water, so it can either be leached through the soil. If you get a lot of rainfall, nitrogen can get washed through the soil. It goes into the groundwater, it can go into the rivers, or it can go up into the atmosphere. So if nitrogen can go up into the air as nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas, or it can go up as ammonia. And the most nitrogen can be lost in the couple of 3 to 5 days after you apply it. So this graph here is showing a typical farm where fertilizer is applied 3 times a year. So the first application here with the red circle, this was in early April. So it's nice dry conditions. There was very little loss of nitrogen. The grass took it up. And so you can bear in mind this is a good time of year to apply nitrogen. So the April time, the soil temperature rises quite quickly, warms up, the grass starts to grow really quick. So if you're thinking of applying slurry and fertilizer, so the April times are really good. So I think I was just explaining here. So this is the 3rd application of fertilizer, and fertilizer was applied and there was heavy rain in the 2 or 3 days following fertilizer application. A lot of this nitrogen was then lost to the air as nitrous oxide. So the main thing with applying nitrogen, if it's forecast rain in the next few days immediately after, then you're better to avoid applying because there's a risk of that nitrogen loss into the air. And also with nitrogen, if it's a drought period, I wouldn't apply any fertilizer because it'll just sit in the soil. The grass stops growing and it's not taken up. So be very mindful of weather conditions when applying nitrogen fertilizer. Okay, so a lot of people would ask the difference between different nitrogen sources. So there's a lot of nitrogen fertilizers out there. There's CAN urea, protected urea, and now there's liquid nitrogen fertilizer. In our research, we have found very little difference between these fertilizers. If you look at the whole year and the overall yield for the year, there's actually very little difference between all of these products. They're all good nitrogen sources, but you're going to get variation at different times of the year, depending on what time of year you apply it and between years. So if you get a wet year, a dry year, there can be variation in the performance of each of these products, but overall, we've found no real significant difference between them. So it's we can't really recommend any particular nitrogen fertilizer over the other, because they're all very good, and it's very, very weather dependent. It's similar with your yield and your grass growth, very weather dependent on the performance of each of these nitrogen fertilizers. Now, there's a lot of new products such as liquid nitrogen fertilizer. So this is a liquid fertilizer rather than a foliar application. So a liquid nitrogen fertilizer, we've done a tiny bit of research on it, and we've found that liquid nitrogen fertilizer is taken up very, very quickly once it's applied. So probably in the first 2 weeks after you've applied liquid nitrogen fertilizer, it's all been taken up. Whereas a granular product would sit in the soil a wee bit longer and would be taken up over a number of weeks, whereas a liquid product would be taken up very quickly, and you'd probably have to reapply more frequently. So it's a similar situation with slurry. We need to reduce our emissions from slurry. So slurry can also lose nitrogen, particularly to ammonia up in the air. Slurry can get washed off fields. So you can lose nitrogen through surface runoff, and also you can lose phosphorus from surface runoff of slurry. So we would recommend using a low trajectory spreading technique, such as a trailing shoe, and this improves nitrogen use efficiency, and it can increase yields by 25%. So in the videos following my presentation, you're going to hear from Ian McClelland and Thomas Steele, and they mentioned they've been using low trajectory spreading techniques, and they'll mention how their experience with it. And again, with slurry, it's very important the timing and the weather conditions at the time of application. So your other main nutrients are potassium and sulfur. So these are key nutrients. So what you want to do here is apply enough, but not too much. So your potassium is particularly important for silage ground. You don't want to get deficient in potassium, particularly for silage. The only issue with potassium, it has this relationship with magnesium. So if you put on a lot of potassium fertilizer in the springtime and you have grazing suckler cows, sometimes this can, there's a potential there to contribute to grass tetany. So we'd be very careful about putting on potash fertilizer and then grazing suckler cows early in the spring. But apart from that, potassium, you need to apply it every year. It's very soluble. It also washes out of the soil. So particularly silage ground, make sure you're sitting at index 2 for your potash. Now, sulfur, we've had a history of sulfur deficiency in Northern Ireland, and we've been promoting sulfur, the use of sulfur in fertilizers. Now, the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, early results are showing that actually the sulfur levels in our soil have really increased, and we don't have as much of a deficiency of sulfur anymore. This is just very early results, and we think this is because a lot of nitrogen fertilizers now contain sulfur. But the problem is we don't want to put on too much sulfur. So the thing is you need to put on sulfur, but not too much. So the recommendation for sulfur is really to get on in the spring. You might only need to put it on once a year, and then you're better just to go to a straight nitrogen fertilizer with no additional sulfur. You shouldn't really be applying it every cut, except if you're on a really sandy soil. So we don't want to be applying too much sulfur. It washes out of the soil quite like nitrogen. So we don't want to end up in a situation where there's sulfur getting into the rivers. So with sulfur, you need to apply it, but just don't overdo it. That's our advice with sulfur. Okay, so I'm just going to cover the final nutrient now, which is phosphorus. So in Northern Ireland, we tend to over apply phosphorus because there's a lot of phosphorus in slurry. We put out a lot of slurry, but then we're putting additional phosphorus fertilizers on as well. And phosphorus builds up in the soil, and it stays in the soil. So there's a huge buildup of phosphorus over the years, and the priority with phosphorus, we need to kind of minimize any loss into our rivers. So in the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, farmers are going to receive a map like this. This is a runoff risk map, and this is showing where there's risk of runoff on your farm. So whenever you apply slurry, if you get rain, sometimes the rain can run across a field and carry slurry with it. So slurry can run over a field, it's getting into our rivers, and it's affecting the water quality. So with the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, we're supplying each farmer with one of these runoff risk maps, and this shows where your risk of runoff is highest. And this would just indicate where just to be careful, plant slurry It's okay if it's dry weather, dry fields, but if it's particularly wet and there's a lot of rainfall, this is where your risk of runoff is highest. So this is just an indicator to the farmer where the risk of runoff is high on their farm, and just to be careful with their slurry applications. And we also, now slurry is really important. So we want to promote the use of slurry. It's really high in organic matter, really high in nutrients, and slurry is good. We just have to be careful with it. We're doing a lot of work in AFBI on buffer strips, planting trees beside rivers, and this will kind of intercept any runoff from fields and soak it up before it gets into the river. So on farms, things like scrub or kind of a riparian strip beside a river is a good idea. Also to have fencing at the bottom of a field if you have a river running, just to keep cattle out from getting into the rivers. That'll all kind of reduce any chance of phosphorus getting into rivers. So that's a priority with phosphorus. So I'm just going to touch on some current and future research we're doing. So there's a lot of new fertilizer products coming on the market at the moment. We're having a look at some of these, and there can be things like pelletized products, for example, poultry pellets, or are getting quite, so there's a lot of companies developing like a pelletized sort of poultry litter, things like compost. There's a lot of compost products out there, sort of household waste, garden waste, making these into composts and promoting these for application on agricultural land. So we're doing quite a lot of trials in AFBI looking at each of these products, looking at the benefits of them. It's more difficult for grassland because some of these products are very dry. If you plow it to grassland, it can sit on just on the surface of the grass. It doesn't absorb as easily as slurry would. But for an arable system, you can plow some of these composts in to the soil, and it's actually very beneficial for an arable field. Or if you have a rotation, you can plow some of these composts or manures into your field when you're plowing or reseeding even. So there are some uses for these, and this would reduce your need for additional chemical fertilizer. So part of the thing for the environment at the minute is we need to reduce our reliance on purchased bagged fertilizer, and some of these new products are a way of doing that. So now we are going to just this is the final part of my presentation tonight. We're looking at nutrient management at a subfield scale. So in a single field, there's a lot going on. So usually we just think of a field as one unit, but actually when you look across a field, there's a huge amount of yield variation and nutrient variation across a field. And we had a big project there called Silage Check, where we looked at yield variation across 10 silage fields across Northern Ireland. And you can see the grass yield varies by 2 to 4 tonne a hectare across a field. This can be because of the landscape. For example, if it's a hilly field, you can get spots of high yield either top or the bottom of the slope. Some parts of fields just naturally yield better than others, but there is huge variation in yield across the field, and we're trying to see, can we manage this a bit better? Can we improve the lower yielding areas, or do we make the most of the better yielding areas of a field? And sometimes it's either landscape feature in the field or can be a nutrient distribution across your field. So if you look at your nutrients, if you soil sample across a field, nutrients actually vary quite widely. So this is a lot of fields are like this. So this is a map of your phosphorus across a field. And this field is actually going from an index 4 to an index of 0 all in the one field. So half of that field is saturated in phosphorus and the other half is deficient. And this is very, very common for nutrients. But we don't normally measure it because we wouldn't be measuring at this intensity. But if you map a field, this is very often what you get. And now it's maybe because of the way nutrients are applied. For example, slurry, part of a field may just naturally get more nutrients if it's easier to get into a part of a field, so that there could be greater slurry applications than another part if it's at the bottom of a slope or whatever way the field is. And in some of the videos after this, Thomas Steele and Ian McClelland have been talking about how they are using GPSs. So a lot of tractors now are fitted with a GPS, and this can help you control your slurry and fertilizer applications, so you're avoiding that overlap. So if you avoid that overlap, you're spreading your nutrients more evenly across the field, and you can prevent some of those hot spots occurring, which can lead to nutrient loss. And it can, and hopefully it'll help balance your yields out, so you're getting a more even yield across your field, and not pockets of high yielding and low yielding across your field. But this is all really new technology. A lot of arable farmers are using this technology, particularly over maybe across the mainland where they've bigger fields. It's different for us here with our smaller fields, but this is the way technology's going. This is the way management's going. And AFBI, we are doing a lot of research on this technology and the benefits for farms in terms of improving nutrient use efficiency, nutrient distribution and yields across a field. So I'm just going to sum up now. I've covered quite a lot of material there this evening. So the summary points would be: test your soils every 4 to 5 years, make use of the soil nutrient health scheme, the advice you get from it, the results you get from it, do your training, the CAFRE training to understand your results, speak to your CAFRE advisors or AFBI staff if you need any help interpreting your soil results. Know how to manage individual nutrients. So obviously those, what I talked about tonight, nutrients behave differently in soil. You need to consider how nitrogen behaves and how easily it's lost, how phosphorus, what the priorities are for phosphorus in terms of preventing runoff into waterways, and consider the weather. So particularly with nitrogen, try and avoid applying nitrogen if there's heavy rain forecast, because you can really reduce the loss of nitrogen if you don't apply, if it's going to rain heavily in the next couple of days. And embrace some of the new technology. Like, don't be afraid of GPS. This will improve the precision on your farms, and it's obviously going to take time to get used to new technology, but this is the way forward, and we'll be doing the research to kind of to see the benefits of some of this technology. So that's all I have tonight. So I'm going to hand back to Jason.
Okay, Suzanne, thank you very, very much for that. I'm just going to quickly kind of introduce the next part, which is the video. So we're bringing out case studies from farms across the province, been working with us in AgriSearch as part of our Beacon, our Grass Check, and other projects like the EIP projects. And these farmers are an integral and vital part of the AgriSearch's work, and we couldn't deliver our research and innovation programs without them. I'd like to thank them all. This evening's video features Thomas Steele, a well-known dairy farmer who farms in partnership with his brother and parents near Kircubbin on the Ards Peninsula, Hugh Harbison, who farms near Aghadowey, and also Ian McClelland, who farms near Banbridge. So we'll run the video now.
I'm Thomas Steele. I farm here in Kircubbin, County Down, in partnership with my parents and my brother. We're currently milking just shy of 600 cows on farm, with all young stock kept for replacements. We operate a high input, high output system, and cows are housed 365 days a year. Yeah, on the farm, recently, due to legislation, we have started spreading slurry with dribble bar. Again, we've found that probably regrowth will be a lot quicker, and especially with our multi-cut system, we need to get the slurry out quickly, get fertilizer applied to allow that to grow again, and for cutting the next time. We've also, I suppose, maybe been targeting our slurry a lot better. With the closed period, slurry's been kept on farm here during the winter. We can then use that slurry to grow good crops of maize, and also for our silage as well. We'll be able to reduce the amount of bought-in fertilizer that we're actually using. All maize is grown on farm purely through cow slurry and farmyard manure. There's no actual bagged fertilizer applied to that. And I'll say for the grassland, with soil analysis, etc. We're targeting where our slurry goes and what is required for each field. We fertiliser spread on farm using a variable rate fertiliser spreader with GPS. It's early days with this technology. We have it actually linked to the tractor for yield mapping, which is in turn can be synced with the forage harvester from the contractor, and it's something I suppose in the future, and it's early days technology yet, but I think we'll be able to use this technology to increase productivity and also be more efficient in our fertiliser usage on farm. The setup for that GPS is plug and play, and I suppose it's a matter of sitting down just someday in the office and getting the two things to match up, that we can sort of find our good areas and those areas that are growing a lot more grass yield-wise than areas that don't, and analysing it to see where the problems are and how they can be addressed.
Hi, my name's Hugh Harbison and I'm farming here in Aghadowey, which is between Aghadowey and Coleraine. We're milking 180 odd calving cows, calving them all in 12 weeks, producing 8,000 litres off about 2 tonnes a meal, supplying Deal Farm with our milk. We started applying slurry and very dilute slurry and dirty water to our grazing platform to try and reduce our use of artificial nitrogen. We found this year particularly it has allowed us to reduce our fertiliser usage by up to 15% on our grazing platform this year, so it's been a real good job, and I think our soils and our grass quality is very good too because of that, and I've been reasonably happy with it.
How you doing? I'm Ian McClelland, a farm here down in Loughbrickland, Banbridge. We're on 100 cows or so, doing 10,000 litres. We try and graze as much as possible, but as is the grazing year, we're in now full time from a week ago. This is the first week of October, so we'll last it out to the 1st of October, and that was the end of the grazing for the year. We started using the less spreading about 3 years ago on the fertiliser sower. It came early spring that year, so we're very happy with using it. We've found that we can go on to grazing ground a bit more often, doing less damage and less refusals when the cows go back in. So that's been a big benefit with the spreading, the fertiliser spreader. It came early that spring and it has been very successful. It's very, very accurate and spreads to the GPS as well. So with the size of the fields, it's not really viable to go for variable rate spreading on individual fields. Just there's not the size and not the detail yet. But as with everything, I would say that'll come. You can spread very accurately with the spreader. You're not wasting any fertiliser whatsoever, which especially last year was a very good when prices were £1,000 a tonne, so you didn't want to be losing too much. So no, it has been very good that way, so that's really the biggest benefit, and no overlapping. It was difficult to use at the start. It's a complicated piece of kit, but like everything, that's just like getting onto a computer or getting onto iPads. You soon learn, and I find it very easy now, and it keeps all the records for you as well, which is a great thing. At the end of the year, you can tot up exactly what you spread on each field, and so that's another great benefit with it.
Okay, and just so to sum up, nutrient management in grassland is an important topic both for the farmer and for the environment. The price of manufactured fertilizers and compound fertilizers in particular has increased considerably in recent years. This makes it all the more important that farmers optimize the use of their organic fertilizers, slurry and farmyard manure. As Suzanne outlined, nutrient management starts with soil testing, and then using this as the basis for applications of lime and organic fertilizers. A pH of 6 or above is critical to ensure that you get the full economic value out of your fertilizers, lest the application will further enhance the uptake of nutrients. The silage check project undertaken by AFBI highlighted substantial variations in yield across the field, with many of the silage harvesters being driven by contractors now having yield mapping capabilities. Perhaps it is time that grassland farmers started to follow their arable colleagues and consider the use of precision fertilizer application. As reported in the video, both Thomas and Ian have seen benefits of using advanced fertilizer application technology on their farms. At the end of the day, what this all comes down to is ensuring that we maximise the uptake of nutrients by our swards and minimise losses to the environment, either through water or air. That's a win for the farmer, and it's also a win for the environment. And I'll hand back now to John to do the Q&A.
Okay, Jason, thank you very much, and thank everybody so far. Yeah, we will. Unfortunately, Hugh and Thomas aren't able to join us this evening, so we can't direct any questions directly to them. But if you have anything you think particularly relevant, I'm sure we can get that question through to them, and they'll get back to you. So I'm just going to go through the Q&A. I'm going to read out the questions. They may be appropriate for one or all of our panelists, but we'll take them just in the order in which I'm reading them off my screen here, and we'll address the first one. The first one I'm guessing is to Suzanne. It's saying, is there a guide for the nutrients as a part per million target? Example figured how much sulfur to apply from soil test results. So yeah, I suppose you talk Suzanne there about no index 2 and what's an optimum indexing. Is there something particular in terms of that parts per million to give a more accurate idea of what to apply?
Yeah, so usually the recommendations would be a kilogram per hectare, but you can convert that, and then in your soil nutrient health scheme results, you will get recommendations, and it's better than, yeah, you can do a conversion yourself to how much you should apply. So the target for sulfur would be around 30 kilograms per hectare per year. And if you apply a certain amount of nitrogen, if it's a nitrogen sulfur fertilizer, a lot of that sulfur will be covered in that first application. So that's why we recommend sulfur. Really, you can get all you need on that first application with your nitrogen rate. That you don't need to be applying additional for the rest of the year. But usually the recommendations would be in a kilogram per hectare, but you'd have to convert that yourself if you want to know the exact amount. Or it's very difficult to buy a sulfur fertilizer on its own. It's usually with the nitrogen. So I would go with your nitrogen rate and work out how much sulfur you're adding. It is difficult. It's just, if you just get in the ballpark, you should be okay.
Okay, I maybe actually ask yourself, Ian, from a farmer's perspective in terms of that application. Have you you're in zone 1, Ian? Where have you done? Your soil testing done. Is that right?
We have the soil testing done. Yeah. So I have, because I've been in other schemes previous to this and other bits and pieces, we have soil tested quite a bit here over the last number of years, and have the soils up, and I've spread a lot of lime and have the soils up now all over 6. So, and up to 6.5 or 6.7, but I think it's the highest. So we have done that already, so, and I've seen good results from it. For the sulfur end, okay, we usually use. Sorry, John.
No, you're grand, and you're grand. No, I was going to say we'll probably will come back later. Maybe the fact you have actually been through that, I think might be very interesting for people. Though I haven't had. I'm 3 in my own farm, so we're still waiting, and we'll maybe actually. I don't know whether Elizabeth want to come in and comment too. I mean, some of those results have come through, and there was a mention of, I think it was, sulfur was higher than maybe I expected to be. So, well, maybe we'll tease that out. Maybe we'll go through the Q&A through the rest of the evening. I have another question here. Relates to a product was mentioned specifically, Suzanne, by yourself, and was saying that surely pelletizing manures has a high energy requirement. Obviously the energy, the heating, and the electricity required to press them and all that sort of stuff. I mean, is there an energy balance issue in all of that, Suzanne, do you think?
Oh yeah, there definitely is, but it's early days in the process for these products as well. The pelletizing is quite a new thing. We're even talking about pelletizing digestate, pelletizing slurry. And the reason there we're looking down this path is so that the potential to move slurry and move digestate across Northern Ireland between farms, potentially if there's surplus nutrient on one farm, it'd be easier to move a pelletized product than it would a liquid product. So this is a reason. It's all research still, it's early days, there is an energy cost to it. Pellets are particularly valuable for like an arable farmer where they don't have slurry on their own farm, but you could bring a pelletized product in, it'd be easier to plow in. So there is an energy cost to it, but we'll have to look at this because there's some farms which have just too much slurry, and it's just a way of dealing with that surplus. And at the moment, that's the way the research is going. There's a lot of research looking into what do we do with excess slurry, and pelletizing is an option. We don't know in the future what way, you know, if it will end up where we go down that route, but this is what the research is looking at the minute, the potential of pelletizing nutrients and then moving them about.
Okay, we've seen things like chicken manure pellets, and sometimes I've questioned sometimes some of the figures they're quoting in terms of the NP and K. Is that well enough standardised, do you think, Suzanne, or is that something again which will develop as the market develops? Or?
Well, there'd be huge variability, like in slurry or any manure, there's very huge variability between batches. But if it came to it that these products were being sold and you had to declare what was in it, so if it had to be, if a company was going to set up and sell poultry pellets, they would have to standardize their process so that every batch would have a similar nitrogen content or similar phosphorus content, so whoever's buying that knows what's in it. So it would standardize it to pelletize it, and if they were going to sell it on, then they would have to know what was in it, and the farmer would know what was in it. But yes, batches of slurry and manures are very variable. It depends on the source they come from, the feed that animal was feeding on, and the nutrient content is very variable. But even for a farmer now putting out slurry, every batch of slurry they put out has a different nutrient content. It's hard to know what's in it, the exact amounts.
Yeah. Okay. Well, another question here is asking, when is the best and safest time of the year to spread K if you have sucklers? I suppose the question being, you made the point that spreading it can cause other issues with suckler cows in particular. Is there a particular time of year when it's best to do that?
Yeah, well, if it's grazing land, I would maybe put out the K later into the summer. But if it's silage ground and there's no grazing animals, you're better to get it out early in the spring, and get it out early. But if it's grazing land, you can maybe just delay it more, or you can put out some, but just not too much, and leave it to maybe later in the summer to get the K out.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, a question here around urea. Is there much advantage to dissolving urea and adding a folic acid, if that's the right acid, and applying it through a sprayer over granulated, apart from price? So yeah, you intimated, I think, Suzanne, that you didn't think there was an awful lot of difference, but we see these products being presented to us at different shows in different places. So in that case, dissolving urea, what's your thoughts on it?
It's more the speed of the uptake. So if you dissolve it, we know that it's likely to be taken up very quickly. So if you're looking at boosting growth in the spring, say you have cold, so sometimes in the springtime, if it's a cold spring and the soil's cold and it takes a wee while to warm up, and you want to just boost your growth, sometimes get the nutrients in there quickly in the spring, it can kind of boost early growth. If conditions are slow growing at the start of the season. But apart from that, that's the main benefit of a liquid product, the speed of uptake. We haven't done a huge amount of other research apart from that, so we don't really know the emissions. We don't know other benefits yet, but all we know from what we've done is that it's taken up very quick, and it can actually, in the space of 2 weeks, you can have better growth than a granular product because it would take longer to dissolve, so your growth can come a wee bit later with a granular product. It's just that speed of uptake and speed of growth.
Andrew, maybe ask yourself, have you tried any of these products, have you?
Me, John?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
We did a small trial last year with dissolved urea, and I would agree with Suzanne. It grew very quick. You can't put too much on because it'll burn the grass. If you put too much on the one, you could only put on 25 units, and but it used it very quick and then run out of power. So you'd have needed to have been going in again, you know, maybe spraying it twice. So I don't see it really as a runner, because it's just it's not going to be cost effective to spray twice against sowing once, you know, and it's working out maybe the same price, if not slightly dearer anyway. Maybe there's a slight difference in price, depends when you're buying stuff, but I don't really see it as a runner. The soil fertilizer now that they're saying, I'm not sure what way you said, there's a foliar one and there's a soil one. The soil one's maybe a better chance. It goes into the soil and takes slightly longer to come up into the plants. So I think it's maybe a bit more of a runner, but from the trial that I did last year, I didn't see much of a benefit against just plain fertilizer.
Yeah, you would need to nearly go out every couple of weeks with the liquid, and then we found that if you left it after that, after 2 weeks, the growth slows down. Whereas a granular product would be steady growth, say over 4 weeks. So at the end of 4 weeks, there was no difference between the granular and the liquid. The liquid was just all used within the first 2 weeks, and then the growth really slowed once it's been used. Whereas a granular had steady growth over 4 weeks. So yeah, it's that number of times you have to keep going out to reapply, which are, you know, a cost and time and everything in that.
Yeah, Suzanne, maybe when we're on the subject of urea, I mean, you mentioned about protected urea, and certainly in terms of ammonia emissions, protected urea is something we've been told that we'll have to look to use more of. I mean, have you any evidence to suggest that by using protected urea, you know, we will see a benefit in terms of either ammonia emissions? I'm assuming if there's ammonia being lost in the environment, it's not being made available for the plant in the form of nitrogen for growth. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've done quite a lot of work on protected urea. It definitely does reduce ammonia emissions, and it also there's really low nitrous oxide emissions as well with it. So there's very low emissions with it. But really, if you look over the year, we haven't in AFBI, we haven't found any huge significant differences in yield between protected urea and CAN. But now other places like Chagas in the south, they have found significantly higher yield at times with protected urea over normal urea. I think it just depends on the soil and the weather and things. But yeah, sometimes you would get a great benefit from it, and sometimes there's not anything significant enough to maybe justify the cost, but it definitely does reduce emissions. Yeah. So
have you found that, Ian? Have you worked with protected urea? I mean, I've heard this as well. It very much depends on the weather conditions as to what benefit you get from it.
We had fully intended to go all protected urea last year. It ended up we couldn't get any protected urea with the prices. So we bought all our, like some people, like a lot of people who bought a lot of fertilizer last winter, and the protected urea just wasn't available at that stage. So all this year's fertilizer was bought then. So this coming year, we're going to go with protected urea for as much of the crop as possible to see, and we'll try it out against, we'll have a few fields of our ordinary fertilizer, you know, composition. So, and we'll try and see what our yields are like, try to protect this. So.
I should actually say Elizabeth and Jason are on the webinar as well, you know, on the panel. So I mean, if Elizabeth, Jason, if you want to pitch in with any comments, any of this, like you know, just give me a wave or whatever, or just shout out. You're happy enough, yeah.
No, absolutely. No, it's the point that Suzanne made in her presentation, and Ian, you've just called it out. The weather has so much of a play whenever it comes to the emissions as well. I think whenever Suzanne and I were chatting through the presentation, you know, the weather conditions and consideration for those is as important nearly as the product itself, albeit protected urea will help. safeguard the emissions for sure.
Okay. The next question here deals with separated slurry, and I suppose it's asking that question of is lower dry matter separated slurry with the solids removed, lower dry matter slurry, will it result in lower ammonia emissions? I suppose I'm looking at Jason, Suzanne, or Elizabeth perhaps to comment first of all.
So lowering ammonia emissions from slurry really comes from the pH of it more so than its dry matter. Dry matter will help, but the pH adjustment is the key to trying to lower emissions of ammonia from the slurry agenda, and keeping it locked in under covered stores, etc. But Suzanne, have you anything else you want to add?
No, I agree with you there. It is. It's the, I would say it's the form of nitrogen in a drier product than a more liquid product. It might be more in the organic form and take longer to break down and longer, to give emissions in a drier product. But it definitely is the pH is a more prominent factor affecting your emissions from ammonia from slurry.
Okay, another question here, going back to sort of where we started on the questions around the soil nutrient scheme, and it's asking about when that training is going to become available. And we'll maybe take that out a little bit more. We have a few minutes left, and maybe just talk a little bit. I'd like to be very interested in your experiences, Ian, from having done it, and maybe find out if you've got some feedback on that yet, and what you think that feedback has been like. So I'll maybe start with yourself, Ian, on this one, in terms of that.
Sorry. No, it's been very good. Our results came back. As I say, we have tested quite a number of times over the last few years, and there wasn't anything really that jumped out at me. But you can't do anything unless you know what you're dealing with, first of all. So you have to have your figures in front of you at all times with everything that you do on the farm. So to know where you are, we would sow and have sown very little pea in the last 5 years here. There's an odd bit of compound goes on maybe for reseeding, just to get grass established and stuff. But other than that, we would sow little or no pea at all. It's all just straight nitrogen and maybe a bit of MOP at certain times just to lift the field slightly, but that's all we'd be using. So, and I know a lot of farmers that just sow 20-10-10 or 27-6-6 just as they've always done, and they don't know any different. And I'm not saying that it doesn't work, it does work, but there's a certain amount of that piece just being lost. So with the soil nutrient health scheme, at least people know where they are and have the figures at hand to say, well, actually I don't need that, or I do need that. So it'll hopefully put people in a better place.
John, I know Billy asked about the training. I mean, the training's actually online, and I've done the first module of it. I'll still do the second module, which is on the actual using the application, but it's online through the CAFRE website. You can go on, you can dive in and out. It's a series of kind of very easy to watch videos that goes through all the basics and the fundamentals. You can just dip in and out of it as you've got time, but you can do it on an iPad if you wanted. And that video training is on the CAFRE resource. You just put in your business number, log in, and away you go. And it's actually a very simple little training course that you can just do at your own time and at your own leisure.
Sorry, Jason, would it be worthwhile maybe putting that out in the press a bit, making that information more widely available? Not the training, but the fact that it can be accessed because I didn't really know that. And I'm in some of the groups. It
is actually, and I only one day I was talking.
Sad, but you know what I mean. It's not very well publicised.
No.
It's probably because the soil nutrient health scheme is so important now, and it's going to be well looked upon in future. So
I agree. It's a bit of a best kept secret because only when I was talking to Suzanne or actually Rachel or one of our colleagues one day at Loughgall, and I hadn't even realised when it was all up and it was all going. So I know we're carefully even starting to publicise it in the last while, but yes, no, it is. And the boys should do a bit more, but it is there. It is available.
You know, even on the grass check. I know the grass check's over for the year now, but you know, even you know, if it was just a corner piece in the bottom.
Well, you put a link in, yeah. No, I think I think we just publicize the link a bit more because it's once you get the link, it's very easy.
Yeah, I think it is fair to say that that scheme is the envy of, well, not just the other regions of these islands, but further afield than that. And we're speaking to other farming organisations, they can't believe that we have been able. We're actually doing that. I mean, it's a great achievement. I mean, I suppose we're coming near the end, but in terms of results that are coming back, Suzanne or Elizabeth, I mean, are the results as you expected them to be? Are you noticing any trend? You mentioned the sulphur trend. Is anything else sort of standing out at you?
It's very early days. We're just analysing the zone 1 at the moment. I think it's similar to like a previous pilot scheme we did in terms of you know, percentage of where we're sitting at with nutrients, particularly, you know, phosphorus number of fields or maybe a surplus in phosphorus, and general trends in nutrients are similar to a pilot we had done, you know, because AFBI has a history of doing these pilot soil sampling schemes. So we would have focused on certain catchments, and that'll be part of our general research. We're looking at specific catchments and things. So we kind of knew the trends, and when you roll that out wider across Northern Ireland, it's a similar pattern we're sort of seeing. But obviously it's very early days. We're kind of just looking at what we're getting at the moment. And then it'd be interesting now going into zone 2. There's a lot more wetter weather. You know, we're seeing the effects of underlying geology and climate. Whenever you look at Northern Ireland as a whole, you know, like the west is a lot wetter. That affects nutrients in soil compared to the zone 1, the east, which is drier. So there's wee things that are going to come through, like climate and geology, which, you know, stand out more at the wider scale. But it's certainly interesting.
Okay. Listen, as always happens with these things, or as often happens, we have a couple of late questions coming in. I do want to try and get a quick answer to them. So one question here around acidified slurry and the impact that might have on soil biological health. Just a very quick comment: acidified slurry, good or bad for soil?
We don't know. We haven't done the research on that. We know how important soil pH is. So that is like a priority for us to keep an eye on that soil pH, and whether if you acidified slurry, what impact that would have on soil pH and the soil biology, we don't really know yet. And particularly in our soils, which are of a tendency to be acidic anyway, we haven't done research on that, so I can't answer that, unfortunately. But hopefully in the future we might get a look at that.
If John
Elizabeth, you want to comment? Yeah.
If John McElroy was on the call, he would say the acidification is really very subtle and very similar to rainwater pH adjustment. But it's the buffering effect of liming acidifying that I think is the main concern when it comes to the biological status of the soil, which, as Suzanne rightly says, is something we definitely need to bottom out, because acidification is a very powerful tool to reduce both ammonia and methane from slurry.
And what another, I think this probably is the last question, and goes back to lime again. When is the best time of year to spread lime?
I would say in the autumn and the end of the summer, it's easy time, because you're not trying, the start of the year, you're trying to get out with your nitrogen. There's a load of things happening. You don't want to put nitrogen and lime. I would avoid putting them too close together, because that can increase ammonia. I would go out sort of the autumn time and give it time to dissolve over the winter. So lime takes time to work in soil. You're better putting it on end of the summer, leaving it over the winter, so by the next spring your soils are at a better pH status. But you can put lime out anytime. It's getting that window. Whenever works for you, you're better getting it out than not. So if you have to go earlier in the year, that's fine. But yeah, it does take time to work. So probably let it work over the winter, so you're ready for your next year.
John, I just wanted to make one more comment, if that's okay, on something that to call out. The successes of some pilots and catchment work that have been completed with Suzanne and her colleagues, in that whenever, you know, Upper Ban catchment, and you're saying Strood and Colebrook, whenever farmers are armed with the knowledge of the nutrient status and riparian strips where to place them with LiDAR mapping, we have been able to improve water quality in those catchments. So I suppose just proof of the pudding that, you know, this research has a positive impact when adopted in catchments, and we have seen the positives in the water and the associated water quality. So it's just to finish on that note, I suppose, John, is what I wanted to stress.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth, and we will finish on that note. Thank you very much. I just thank everybody, all the panelists for their presentations, and thank all the participants for their questions and for joining us. And just I suppose to remind you about the webinar next week, which will summarise a lot of what has happened previously. And I suppose if I have any sort of summary from myself of it, I mean, like I think it's not so much soil science as it is soil art. It's a phenomenally complex issue, and all the more reason why we need good research and good work being done, and good work being done at farm level as well in all of this area. So I will thank you all again for your participations, and see you all again soon. So thank you very much.